Mackenzie, Sie sprechen Deutsch?
Nee. So, guten Tag miteinander.
Verrichter Sternenkeim, nicht laufen heute, verricht Herrgottskeim.
Es gibt Leute, die würden alle die Wege nie.
Ich gehe mit dem, und wenn ich auf 0 Franken auf dem Armenrecht muss mit dem, ich gehe vor mit dem, wo ich will.
Sorry, ich habe gespritzt.
Snijpüti.
Nein, Angst und Geld habe ich keine.
Was unterscheidet Menschen vom Schimpans?
Kappen schauen, Mann. Sie muss da reinschauen, Herz.
Bijassen und Schafsäckchen.
So sieht man wirklich schwarz, nicht nur rot.
Ausländer muss pass auf in Engelberg, weil Engelberg ist mein Land.
Und was man noch hoffen ist allein, dass sie Hemmige haben.
Was hast du erlebt, du hure Banane?
Die berühmte, feine Mohrenköpfe. Sali, hoi zusammen und grüezi miteinander. Welcome to the 10th edition of the Swiss-German Initiative. My name is Fabian. As always, let's get through some administrative information. And if you want to help me with the algorithm, please leave a like and subscribe. As I said in the last episode, Discord changes their policy. So I will switch to TeamSpeak. And TeamSpeak has another advantage as well, because for TeamSpeak you don't really have to register anything. But if anyone still wants to use Discord, the server is still up. So if you want to improve your Swiss German, and you will be okay if it's in the next episode, simply download the client from teamspeak.com, comment in the respective Schweizerdeutsch post, and then I'll guide you through the process via DM. And FYI, it doesn't have to be live. If the time or day would be a problem, so we could pre-record this and air it afterwards. And if you have any questions, either post them directly in the chat or on in the Schweizerdeutsch under the post questions with the current date. Before we continue with the holier than thou segment, I want to have a look with the verbing or verbification. Now this is nearly the same as in German, except Swiss German has an additional variation. The rule goes something like this. If the ending or the suffix, it's an N, it's going to be an E. Ern leads to ere, ihren leads to ihre, and ellen is a le or a elle, where the elle form sometimes doesn't exist in German. So let's get an example for each one. So the first one would be Kopf, Köpfen, so head and beheading. Swiss German Kopf, Köpfe. Alter, Altern, so age or aging, and Swiss German Alter or Altere. Fotografie, fotografieren, Swiss German Fotografie, fotografiere, so photography and taking a photo. Segel, segeln, Sagel, sagle, the sail. And yeah, don't do that with Vogel because it leads to the words for having sex, or a colloquial term for having sex. Then a couple of examples which only exist in Swiss German. So we have Foti or Föteli as photo, which changes to Fötele. Now here and in the following 3 examples, we have a discrepancy between how a Zürcher would pronounce it and how he or she would write it. Because I wouldn't say Föteli, I would say Föteli. But in writing, thanks to writing in Swiss German, in High German in school, most people would use an E in writing. Next one is Fötzel. Again, Fötzel, not Fötzel. So this is a small piece of paper. Changes to Fötzele, which most times would be shortened to Fötzle. And Fötzle means picking up garbage. Nase. Again, Nase, not Nase, so nose. Changes to Nasele. This means stroking somebody else's nose with your nose, kind of like an Eskimo kiss. Then we have Hund, which gets a Hündele. Hund means dog. And so Hündele means activities which you do with a dog, but not a lot of people use that term or actually know that term. And this is a weird one because usually it's just the plural form which gets used, but here the plural form is Hund in Swiss German and Hunde in German. And here the word actually uses a mixed form of it, so yeah. And then we have Finger, which leads to Fingere or Fingerle. Now, this is a weird one because in German and in English, to finger would be an impolite term. But in Swiss German, this isn't really the case, except if you use it in a specific context. Because Fingere or Fingerle would be used if somebody touches something which he shouldn't or she shouldn't, and it implies that it wasn't used correctly, so or touched correctly. So food or an instrument, control panel, so forth. And if you use the le form, so fingerle instead of fingere, it also implies it's in a patronizing manner. But depending how it's said, it acts like like the colloquial, patronizing, cutified form would be fingerle. And then the last one would be gnu, which gets to be gnündle. Now, I have no idea where the additional DL comes from. I mean, in German, it's Knie and Knien, so it should be Gnü and Gnüe, which in some dialects that's actually the case, but in Zürichdeutsch you get an additional DL, so no idea where this comes from, but it's Gnündle for kneeing. So let's switch to holier than thou. Now, in the last couple of episodes, I forgot to mention that if you're interested in the battle alliances and so forth, there are tons of videos on YouTube where you get the information from the history books. And what I wanted to do with this segment is actually not simply like tell the same story again, but I wanted to add my 2 cents to it. And thereby like add a little bit of perspective. So the last time we ended with the Battle of Marignano, where the Swiss got beaten in a ferocious manner, and it was during the final, or it was one of the final battles in the War of the League of the Cambrai. Now, if you listen to anything about the situation during that time, or you read about it, you either get information about the wars or the religious information. But those two happening are intertwined. So if the Pope and therefore the Catholic Church wouldn't have been weakened thanks to the war, I would argue that the Reformation wouldn't have happened during that time. Probably would have happened a couple of 100 years later, but not during the end of the War of the League of Cambrai. So now, maybe a small disclaimer, and this is gonna be probably a little bit controversial or challenging some worldviews, but yeah, just FYI. And to understand Zwingli, so the guy on the right, the one which actually did the Reformation in Switzerland, one needs to understand what Luther did. And I would argue that Zwingli served the exact same function and did it even for the same personal reasons i.e. remove celibacy. The difference is that Zwingli seems to really like sausages, aka the affair of sausages, if you want to read about it. So, the official story in a nutshell goes like this. Martin Luther had a problem with the Catholic Church because they went off the script and they promoted the interpretation of the Bible, or their interpretation of the Bible, to which he published his own and nailed those famous 95 Theses to a door. And it is said this was mainly against paying oblates, so indulgences, which is kind of true, but I think, or as you will see, for the wrong reason. Now, to get to what I actually think what happens, we need to have a look what the Catholic Church was and what it wasn't. Now, if I would have to frame it, I would rather than calling it the Reformation, I would call it the GTC, so the Grand Theft Church. But to do this, we need to understand the concept of religion, or a concept of religion, which is foreign to us, actually thanks to the Reformation itself. So to this day, we have the view that the Catholics were the baddies, and they were the strict ones compared to the more all-including and open evangelics. This is mostly due to a lopsided presentation of the actions of the Catholic Church, i.e. stuff like the Inquisition or the Crusades and so forth. It's always presented as if those conflicts were happening in a vacuum. And now, I'm not saying the Catholics were the good guys. What I'm trying to say is get away from the notion of good and bad and look at the situation itself and see the changes in functions, or see the changes as functions, which always have societal consequences. And to do this, we need to adjust our lenses a little bit. So we see, or we have a focus on resources, people, money, and land. And to understand the part about strictness, one only needs to read what Luther actually was promoting. So let's start with that part. Most people know about those 95 Theses from Luther, but it seems that most haven't read them or compared them to what was before. So let's compare those differences in short. Now, the main superficial difference is that the Catholics had a collective mindset, while Luther's aimed at the individual. Today we have an individualistic mindset, so we tend to think individual acts are always superior to collective ones. But most people don't realize that those two aren't actually mutually exclusive, or as the case is, as we are herd animals, or maybe except for some lone wolves, we always have a collectivist or a group behavior. But let's get through them and you'll see what I mean. I'll first read it in Swiss German and then in English. So always read first the Catholic side and then the Luther side. Äußere Taten, physische und geistliche Hilfe für Mitmenschen. In English, exterior actions, physical and spiritual help for your fellow human beings. Innere Haltung, Buß als Sinnesänderung und ein lebenslanger persönlicher Prozess. Interior attitude, penance as a change of mind and a lifelong personal process. So your inner thoughts matter more than good deeds. So believing the right thing is more important than doing the right thing. Sakramental, Vermittlung durch Beichte und Genugtuung. Mediation through confession and amends. Individuell. Buß geschieht direkt zwischen dem Gläubigen und Gott, nicht durch ein priesterliches Ritual. Individual. Penance happens directly between the believer and God, not through a priestly ritual. So, salvation by believing the right thing rather than compensating for your bad deeds. Next one. punktuelle Taten, zu bestimmten Zeiten vollbracht, um Verpflichtungen zu erfüllen oder Verdienst zu erwerben. Specific deeds. Deeds done at specific times to fulfill obligations or to buy rendered services. Lebenslang. Das ganze Leben der Gläubigen sollte eine stetige Buße sein. Lifelong. The whole life of a believer should be a penance. So, rather than good deeds, you should have a lifelong penance. And the last one. Werk von der Liebe. Taten als Beweis für Glauben und Nächstenliebe. Works of love. Doing deeds to prove your faith and charity. Abtötung vom Fleisch. Wahre innere Reue muss sich in der Abtötung vom Fleisch nach außen zeigen. So, killing of the flesh. True inner remorse has to be shown as killing of the flesh. So, rather than doing good deeds, you need to kill the flesh, meaning you shouldn't address the needs of your body. Now, putting it this way, it starts to paint a really different picture. You see that Protestants, i.e. die Reformierten, were a lot more on the fundamentalist side. And frankly, this sounds like some proto-Marxist ideology or socialist ideology. To see this more easily, simply exchange God with the party. And you see that believing in the party program, party manifesto, is more important than actually doing good deeds. Therefore, I will call this proto-Marxist. The further back we go, the easier it is to see the connection between resources and religion. So let's go back when Christianity took over from paganism. Before churches as a building, temples and synagogues were not only for worshipping, they were meeting places. They were more like a mall today than a church. And while most of the shopping part was adjacent to it and not in the temple itself, simply for the reason that you don't want to have too many animals in there, you had everything else like entertainment, moneylenders, changers, medicine, and so forth in the temple. And while the temple was dedicated to a god, so was your whole city-state or village. The god where your city-state or village or temple was dedicated to or was protected by was called the daemon, which we today get the term demon from. Now, I'm not going to do some Bible study, which we in Swiss German would call the Religionsunterricht, so don't worry about that. But the trade takeover is even mentioned in the New Testament in the book of Revelation, and the passage of Lament over Babylon, which in Swiss German would be Beklage or Beklage über Babylon, or the Sturz von Babylon, because it's the lament over the fall, so the Sturz von Babylon. If we would say it colloquially, we would say Jas Gjammer über Babylon, or the Sturz von Babylon. Now, in the verse 11 to 19, it's described how the trade was taken over from the Lady Babylon, which in this text was, they name it the Great Whore. And it lists the products which were traded, now not traded anymore, which implies the trade was taken over. Now, how is this important? Because the whole temple part got transferred to the church, where the church building kept the worship and some parts of the entertainment, and most importantly, the banking and all the other services which were provided in the temple were extracted and more specialized, but still done by the clergy. And the most important part that we get from this is that the Catholic Church was not a bank, it was the bank or the banks, as a large part was managed locally. So now back to this guy and the Reformation. I think he was the face or the guy that gets hired for the job rather than the actual force behind the Reformation. One just has to have a look at his backers and supporters to see that they probably weren't in because they cared about the regular person or that the regular person had to pay indulgences. They cared because they didn't had to pay the indulgences to them. And indulgence is called Oblass in German or Swiss German as well. They had an interest to remove the ban on usury, and there was also the curia. The curia was the fee that you had to pay for taking over high-ranking positions. For the curia, you had to pay like a year's worth of income. And to get a better look which pot or pot size they actually tried to gain, we need to have a look at the biggest lending or banking family in Europe during that time, the Fuckers. So meet the Fuckers. The richest, they call it banking, but they were a money lending dynasty in Europe, or the biggest money lending dynasty in Europe during that time. And how did they get there? They managed indulgent sales. They were loaning for curios, for minor positions, and loaning even up to the Pope and the Habsburgs itself. Now, if one wonders why would the Pope loan, for the same reason as a CEO of a bank cannot simply take money out of the bank. The Fuckers created the first affordable housing as well. So now, affordable housing may sound nice. And it could be that it was created, or in the beginning, it was created for the well-being for some peasants. But the result is that it was the beginning of the renting system and the social housing as we have it today. This is because the church paid for it, so it was a guaranteed constant flow of money. And if you put all of that together, this was a pretty big pot to get. And to make this pot even bigger, we need to have a look at usury. Understanding usury should bring the whole point full circle. Usury in Swiss German or German would be Wucherzins, so rampant growing interest. Wuchern is as well the term we use to describe how weeds grow rampantly. And while it is known that usury brings inflation, most of the time the focus is on the wrong side, because the focus is on the high interest rates rather than the debt remaining in the system and being used as money, which is the actual cause for the inflation. Because if the debt would be paid back, the supply would decrease and therefore the inflation would decrease as well. And usury-free systems tend to be way more stable because having usury always creates debt-based money or debt-based money system, exactly as the fiat system as we have today. And this always leads to that the regular people getting poorer and the tiny fraction is getting rich. Or in other words, the haves get richer and the have-nots get poorer. And just as a tiny side note, in relation to the temple, in older depictions of Jesus chasing out the moneylenders, as you see them here, you always see the other traders and services depicted as well. So, to conclude this segment, to this day, if we compare per capita and poverty to the religious alignment of the cantons, we see a pretty high correlation. By adjusting the capita range and the quota for Sozialhilfe, we could even get a more correlating picture. But I simply took a couple of pictures from Google. So I didn't fiddle with the numbers or anything like that to get the picture I wanted to present. So here on the left side, you see in red the Catholic cantons, and in blue we have the Protestant cantons. And you see that to this day, the Protestant cantons have higher earners, but more poverty as well. So this brings me to the end of this segment. And I have to say, I couldn't or I wasn't able to combine this as much with a language course as I would like or would have liked. But I say it took me way too long, and I threw out a couple of slides because it made it, I say, way too much information for a short amount of time. And yeah, I hope it was still understandable. And yeah, it's because this topic bugs me, and I say most of it is that we have such a wrong view on which changes lead to which outcomes. And yeah, everything is blamed on the Catholic Church. And as again, they're not the good guys and not the bad guys. It's just simply you had certain times, you had certainly corruption everywhere, and not everyone was a good person or so forth. But it's simply not that clear cut as described in many cases. So the things or the information I want to get through the next couple of episodes will be the Peace of Westphalia, the tiny Frenchman, maybe a little bit about the industrialization, and then the world wars, and then we are in the current time. Beat for today. I think I will keep the bi-weekly or maybe every third week, but I try it now bi-weekly, and if it's still too much, I will do it every third week. Except if somebody would come onto the stream, or if we could pre-record a conversation.
As it seems, there are no questions, so I would say have a nice